My name's Colin Laird. I'm a Senior Vice President in Commercial Insurance. Very proud to work at Chubb, very proud to work in the Canadian region. And I'm coming to you today northeast of Toronto, Canada, in a small town called Port Perry. Port Perry's claim to fame is that it was the setting for the 2004 movie Welcome to Mooseport. It starred Gene Hackman and Ray Romano. And the movie itself does not have a single redeeming quality. It was a brutal movie. But the setting and the streetscape, beautiful. So I'd encourage everybody to check out that movie, even if it's on mute, and just absorb the beauty that is Port Perry, Ontario. There's a lot of civic pride in and around my town. So I wanted to start just by saying a big thank you, because I think it's been so remarkable that the company has effectively put together this employee well-being program with such speed and quality and intention in the face of this global pandemic. So there's so many people, some of whom you're looking at, like Carolyn and Dr. Kelly Watts, but so many behind the scenes as well, who have done so much heavy lifting to make this happen. I think it's very unique. I think it speaks to the quality of our organization and as Chubb as an employer. And I think we all need to just recognize and be grateful for that. So today's topic is the power of emotional agility. And that's a topic that's super important to me. It's something that I really started to focus on and try to get better at back in 2015. When I think about emotional agility, I think about it in a similar way to the way that I think about underwriting or claims or risk engineering. It's a craft. And a craft is something that you can get better at. And a craft is something that you can practice. And a craft is something that you can strive for excellence in everything that you do. So to me, emotional agility, it's no longer a nice to have. It's no longer a non-necessity. It really can be at the core of a competitive advantage. And when I think about a competitive advantage, I'm talking about both self-coaching, self-leadership, self-performance, as well as the leadership of those around you in your personal and professional lives. So to me, emotional agility is an extremely important topic, and the power of it is something that we all need to recognize. So with that, I'm going to reintroduce or introduce Dr. Kelly Watts, someone who I had a chance to speak to for about an hour last week. And when I come back to that conversation and I try to put a single word to it, the thing that I keep coming back to is intriguing. We had a super intriguing discussion last week, and I left that discussion feeling energized and enthused about finding a better way forward, finding a more positive pathway forward. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kelly Watts back to the small screen. Welcome, Kelly, and thank you so much for being here again today.
Thanks so much for having me. So much of what you just said resonates so much I am so impressed and appreciate corporations like Chubb that are doing programs like this on such a short timeline and with such intention and quality. And just to underscore what you said a moment ago, I think everything that we're working on here, every topic we're covering could be housed under the framework of that growth mindset that we've spoken about in previous sessions, which is that these are all skill sets that people can learn and practice and circle back when they don't get it right. And even the people like me who teach it, live it, breathe it, if I listen to a podcast, I probably read the book as well. And just because I'm so hungry on these topics, and it's what I love to do. And still, it's not perfect in my life. So I just like to set that framework as we move into talking about the topic today, that it certainly is a skill base that is imperfect in its practice, and we have to be willing to be rough at things if we're going to get good at them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a great starting point for the topic. And before we dive into some of those things in more detail, why don't we start by just setting a baseline? I certainly have a way that I would describe emotional agility, and I'm sure many others on the call would as well. But why don't we start there? How do you describe emotional agility? What's the power of emotional courage, and why is it important?
Sure. And if any of you get a chance, there's a TED Talk link on, what do you call your intranet? Sorry, it's called the Chubb?
The Village.
What is it called? In the Village, thank you. There's a TED Talk by Dr. Susan Downs in the Village that is one of my favorites on this topic. She and Dr. Mark Brackett are probably two of the people I'll reference most today, and so I'm happy to share those references later. But emotional agility, when I think of emotional agility, I think of it as a process that enables us to navigate life's twists and turns with self-acceptance, clarity of mind, and an open mind, and that curiosity that's going to present itself a lot today. So it's not ignoring the negative or difficult or challenging emotions. It's simply treating emotions as information, both in ourselves and in other people, and thinking about it from a space of what can I learn? What is it trying to teach me, right? And so with all due respect to gratitude and positive emotions, we don't want to overemphasize those, right? So I personally won't wear a t-shirt that says good vibes only, because I just don't think that represents the full, even though I'm a yogi and I understand where people are coming from and I appreciate what they're trying to accomplish, but I'm really all about embracing the full spectrum of the human experience, right? So it's about holding that loosely, not being overly attached or getting stuck or, really waiting too long in that difficult emotion, but just simply acknowledging and accepting it so that we can hold it loosely, face it with courage and compassion, learn from it so that we can move past it and make whatever changes are necessary, right? And so it's all this opportunity if we're willing to get curious about it.
Yeah, and when we talked about that last week, the process of emotional agility, sometimes it's even difficult to put a name to the emotion that you're feeling.
For sure.
And that takes practice by itself. When you're talking about the good and the bad and the positive and the negative emotions, how and holding on to those things maybe a little bit too tightly. What about like negative self-talk or self-judgment that can creep in there?
So let me first break down those kind of 4 key concepts that I want to make sure that we touch on today, because I think they're essential in understanding emotional agility concepts and their skill bases as well, right? Number 1, you can think of it as showing up, right? And that's that I just spoke to. Getting curious, not turning away from, not suppressing or repressing an emotion, but simply just experiencing it and letting it pass with some observation and inquiry around what it's about, right? The second one is stepping out, right? Detaching a little bit and just noticing it. There's an old kind of philosophical phrase, the thoughts are not the thinker, right? So just noticing I'm having this thought or I'm feeling this way without necessarily judging it. A lot of our distress comes from what we call meta emotions or metacognitions. It's what we feel about how we feel. The actual feeling itself just is, right? And so if we just let it be and don't say, I shouldn't be feeling so angry, or I should feel grateful that I'm not on the front lines, or all those judgments and criticisms of our emotions compound the distress, right? So detaching and observing is that second part. The third part that you and I had such a great conversation about that maybe we could do a whole session on this another day, but the third part is definitely weaving in the finding your why, right? Finding your core values, because those will be the compass that keeps you on the right path in your life. Once you understand your core values, you will understand your emotions in a different way. Your reactions in life tend to be connected to your values. When I'm doing values exercises with people in the small groups that I do, and if they're struggling to get from, let's say, a list of 10 down to 2, I will say, go throughout a week or 2 of your life or reflect on things that have happened in the past. Notice when you have a reaction, positive or negative, and it will either be in support of value or in violation of that value. And that's the information you need to guide you to the ones that truly are central for you. Once you understand that, it will help you validate your reaction to things and say, well, the reason I'm so upset about that is because I'm really committed to justice, or I'm really committed to, kindness, and I'm really upset that I watched this person be unkind to someone else, right? So it will help you decode some of that for yourself. The other thing about values, I think it's really important to operationalize them, and that's a psychological jargon for just turn it into behaviors. So if trust is important on our team as a team value or a company value, so I want to say, what am I doing, or what can you do that either builds that trust or breaks it down, right? When you show up late to meetings, when you don't reply to my emails, that I read that as, I can't trust you, I can't depend on you, right? And so helping people break down how your behaviors are intentional to support your values and how you might perceive their values in relation, their behaviors in relation to the values that you're talking about, right? And the fourth piece, so there's showing up, stepping away from, walking your why, the number 3, and then moving on, right? It's important once we gather that information and we learn from that information that we make an action plan. Otherwise, we're just stuck in self-criticism, which is, where we'll weave in a little bit more about what you asked. If you just do the introspection and the reflection and you think, okay, these parts of my life aren't working, but you don't then create the fourth step, which is your action plan and moving forward, you're just stuck in a really negative loop, right? And so moving on means small, deliberate tweaks to mindset, motivation, habits. And some of my favorite books I read last year were on habits, right? And really systematizing and putting in systems and structures to support you to execute habits that would support you to be the person that you want to be, right? One of my favorite things that happens mostly in January, people come in and say, I want to change 800 things in my life, right? And I support those changes, but we have to choose which ones, and then we need to break down what's getting in the way, because inevitably 80% of the conversations when I say, okay, well, so, you haven't been exercising in 4 years and now you want to go back to exercise. That's fantastic. What's your plan? And 80% of those responses, whether it's I'm going to be nicer to my kids or I'm going to, go exercise, 80% of those responses tend to be, well, I'm just going to do it, right? And the decision is a start point, but it's not enough. We need to support ourselves with all kinds of systems and structures. So those 4 key concepts, I think we'll weave in and out today: the showing up, stepping out, walking your why, and moving on. All very important to being able to move through these things and come out better.
Absolutely. And this part of a conversation last week was really the big intriguing part. Just today, when you're talking about that taking action or moving on, I think the way some of that plays out at Chubb these days, because we're all working with imperfect information, we're all making decisions that we maybe truly don't understand why we're even going in the direction that we're going. I think that the work on the front end of that process is so important, because then you can start to understand how to make better decisions and how to take action that is much more aligned with your value set, the organization's needs, et cetera. And so often, without doing that work up front, you can find yourself making decisions for the sake of making decisions, and you're kind of crossing your fingers that you're getting it right.
For sure. And another thing I know that I've learned and work on constantly in my life is taking imperfect action, right? Based on the data I have, based on what's available to me now. I can definitely get stuck in analysis paralysis myself and want to keep gathering information and get it just right before I make a move. And sometimes that is a hindrance more than a service to whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
And there's just so much uncertainty for everybody right now, professionally, personally. So there is a lot of negative emotion. There's a lot of stuff that's creeping into people's minds that is hard to deal with. So help us understand, the importance of dealing with negative emotions, and help us understand what might happen if you don't find positive ways to deal with those negative emotions.
Sure. And I know we have a broad audience culturally from all over the world here, but I think different cultures have their own version of. Our Texas version is pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So we are socialized in many cultures to not take the time to express and reflect and move through our emotions. We're often told just fake it till you make it. We just say I'm fine and move on. And so I think just noting that, we give kids stickers and lollipops for putting on a brave face, and we're uncomfortable with distress certainly in American society, and how I've grown up. And then I lived in England for a very long time, which is even an amplified version of that, I would say. And so just recognizing that it is a social pattern that we don't necessarily have to participate in. You know, the average adult says, I'm fine 14 times a week, and only about 1 out of 5 of those times do we mean it, right? And so we're trained to then on a brave face, we ask each other if we're okay. Oftentimes we don't even pause and physically stop and look at someone when we're asking for that response. So it doesn't encourage someone to openly share with us what's going on. I think the other piece to remember is, just like I said, that emotions are just information, right? Our brain is wired to tell us approach or avoid, right? And so when we're having an emotion that's challenging, our brain is saying avoid, don't approach, right? Whether that's a person that we perceive as challenging or whether that's an experience. And so we usually pull back. Just noticing that and know that we are wired for that, and we can override that and say, it's okay, I can move through this. It's simply I'm sad or I'm disappointed and we'll be okay, right? And so just recognizing that because of that, we have been primed to avoid those. And, you know, I'm still searching for the right word too. I know a lot of us in my industry challenge the whole negative emotions. You know, I don't know, challenging, distressing. I think you need to find one that works for you. But part of this is embracing the idea that the full spectrum, there's nothing wrong with sad or angry. You know, my favorite line from that TED Talk of Susan Downs is where she says, it's so true, she talks about the clients that come in to see her for therapy and how they often ask not to feel angry, not to feel sad, not to feel anxious. And she says, I totally understand, they're really hard, but those are dead people's goals. And I just love that, because to experience the full spectrum is to be human and to live a meaningful life.
I think for me, I think about those emotions more as like uncomfortable, you know, because it just kind of helps me avoid the negative self-talk coming in. It just kind of helps me find that path forward. And, you know, doing a lot of this work and trying to figure that out for yourself obviously is beneficial for yourself, but it also opens the door to being able to help other people with the struggles that they may be going through. And I certainly have people who I think of as like magnifying glasses, who are like super helpful and, you know, a multiplier of the positive for me. So how do you think about how people might be able to help others in their personal and professional life on this topic of emotional agility?
For sure. This is definitely a self and other topic, right? So we want to, the more we practice in ourselves, the more the people around us will see not only is it okay, but they'll see the benefits of it. So it's an interplay between those two. But I think that the way we approach conversations, if even the body language of do we stop and look at someone when we're trying to check in with them, how we check in with them. You and I spoke in our conversation about open versus closed questions. So we've become pretty rote socialized to answering how are you with I'm fine. So just know that if you pick that question, or if you say, you okay? 99% of the time someone's going to say, yeah, I'm good, even if they're not, right? So shifting to the open questions, which is, hey, what's the best part of your week? What's something you're excited about in your life? I love the peaks and valleys questions, like tell me the best and the worst of what's going on for you. That says to someone, I really want to know, and I'm a safe space and I'm a container that can hold this for you. I'm genuinely interested. So I think that speaks to the opening of the question and then the response. We need to respond in a way that encourages them to share with us if that's what we're trying to promote, right? And so if we try to, for example, judge, change, or fix what someone's feeling, they're not likely to share that with us again in the future, right? If we simply hear it, and we're going to talk a little bit more about listening in another session, but if we simply are faithful and say, I hear you, yeah, that's hard, okay. Is there any, and then you ask, are you happy just to share this, or is there any problem solving I can help you with? People will tell you if they want advice or not, if they need help or not, typically, right? And so just making all of that implicit, very explicit, I think can really help support the people around you to engage in the same behaviors, even if they're not reading the books and attending the workshops. They will just naturally have to engage in that way if they choose. They won't have to. They could choose to take advantage of that opportunity, right?
And when you are trying to be helpful to those around you, it really hammers home the point that word selection is so important. And those open-ended questions are so important because it really help two people kind of get into the issue much more quickly and have a much more meaningful conversation. So
yeah, and I know a lot of teams are creating different kind of connectors like that. I think we referenced in another session, but just ways to open up a meeting. For example, everybody share a word or two about how you're doing this week. Everybody share a color. Everybody, and really opening up a true check-in. It might be a scale of 1 to 10, or opening up a true check-in so that you're setting the tone that you really want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your other point, like if you are struggling to understand, okay, is this person venting or does this person want a solution from me? Hey, maybe you should just slow down and say, can I offer you a suggestion? And that person might say no, or they might say yes. And that really helps, that two-way street of conversation and listening kind of get at the heart of what needs to happen next.
And I think just notice we all want to do what good in this world, right? We all want to help other people. Just notice if your distress about their distress is getting in the way of them feeling heard, right? And so part of my core beliefs is that I believe that people are strong and resilient. They might not believe that in any given moment, but I believe that they are inherently strong and resilient. So for me to rush in and rescue or fix someone is quite disempowering if they could figure it out themselves, right? So asking, and we have some great research about asking at that point of, can I offer you some support, or would you like to problem solve around a solution? We have some great research about just that question where they engage and accept that support without it being unsolicited. It will be more helpful if you just ask for that permission before you launch into getting advice.
Awesome advice. So we're gonna go back to Carolyn because I think we've got some questions coming in from the group.
We do. We have a couple of really good questions, and one of them you've already answered. So I'll just let you know that you were spot on with what our viewers are thinking, and it was, how can we as leaders create an environment that shows it's okay to share what you're feeling? And I think we talked about that. But a question that is here from one of our viewers is, what would you recommend someone say to an employee who's having a difficult time managing working while they have young children on computers, also asking for assistance with schoolwork? It's a constant interruption to their work and they're always stressed out.
For sure. And this comes back to the point of, first and foremost, empathize and hear their challenge. We spoke in a different session about the challenges that might create for a manager around what if the job on your team can't get done. But I don't think that's the question that's being asked here. I hear just, what should I say? And this came to me, and I actually don't think it applies to young parenthood, but it came to me when I was a new parent. I decided that the only thing that anyone should say to new parents is, you're doing great and how can I help? I actually have carried that forward. I think it applies in most situations, right? I think people often need to be reminded that given the context, they're in an impossible situation. If they're getting anything done, it's probably better than, nothing, and focusing on what they're getting right, focusing on if the expectations are being met or not, and if not, what's a solution as a team that could accommodate for now. But also, how can I help? I see that it's a challenge, right? Is there anything we can do as a team, as a manager, as a colleague, as a friend?
And can I just add one quick thing to that, just from a Chubb standpoint? It might be a good moment, like the reminder for me on that. Like this whole Taking Care series has been very clear, and we all need to remember this, that the first priority is taking care of yourself, and then it's taking care of those around you. And then to your point, Kelly, it's doing what you can to take care of the business. And that is the pathway for a sustainable and positive future.
Sure. We use that analogy of the oxygen mask on the airplane, right? You can't help anyone else until you've put yours on first. And I stand by that. And some mothers, particular parents who are home working and completely stressed, If I tell them to wake up 30 minutes early and meditate, they may want to come through the screen and punch me in the throat. And I understand that, right? It just might be like, you don't understand how far over bandwidth I am right now. But there are some little tiny things that you can do for yourself. You know, it might mean noticing if you're consuming too much news. It might mean noticing if the programming that you're watching or what you're reading is, you know, contributing positively or negatively. It might mean, you know, now that we're coming to a more loose space for some, depending on where you live, we might be in a space in quarantine where you feel comfortable extending to 1 or 2 more people and starting to really say what is available, right? And I'm encouraging everyone to use that, especially people that are home with kids, to use more of a mindfulness approach. If your 20 minutes or 10 minutes on your mat alone in your room is no longer available to you, can you monotask and just be present with something you're doing for 10 to 15 minutes once or twice a day? And so asking them, what are they doing to take care of themselves, I think is also important.
You may have just touched on this, Kelly, in that answer, but the question that came through is they'd like to know how to change the negative emotions into positive under stressful conditions. What's the key to get calm and not react in a negative way?
Yeah, the key is, in my opinion, it's pretty simple. It's the breath and just putting a pause, noticing that your immediate reaction, which is that emotion, is valid and fine, but you may not want that to be your response. So putting a choice point between those two is really helpful. And so it's not necessarily, I want to stick to what I'm saying today, it's not that we change the negative emotion to a positive one necessarily, but more that we move through it. We take a breath. When we come downstairs, let's say, and see that the kitchen's been bombed, we have a reaction, we move through it, and then we choose how to be more effective. And a big part of emotional agility that we barely even got to today is, you know, is talking about naming your emotions and being clear and effective with that. So we'll get to that more with the empathy and the listening next week. But I think being able to say, hey, when I come downstairs and the kitchen's bombed, I feel overwhelmed. Can you guys, the other people in my family, help me with that? Right? So it's weaving in that emotional language so that people understand that you're not just freaking out, you're having an experience that you need some support around.
And I know we're close to time, but if I could just grab one more question in before we go. What is your advice for leaders on how to balance modeling positive behaviors for others and being authentic about how we're feeling when we feel less than wonderful?
Right. Back to that language of stepping away from and detaching from, you know, I'm having a bad day doesn't mean I'm a bad manager or I'm a bad psychologist or I'm a bad friend. It means I'm having a hard day, right? And so I actually think that if we're authentic, it's unlikely that you will, you know, overwhelm them with negativity. It's more likely that I've received emails at the beginning of this quarantine where, you know, a colleague friend said, it was so nice to hear that you've had some hard moments, because I thought, you know, I feel like it's just me. People tend to believe that everyone's functioning better than them. And so to say, I'm having a roller coaster experience as well, I'm just, you know, going to do my best when it's hard, and then I'm going to try to make up for it when it's not so hard. I don't know that you can be over authentic. I know that that's partly cultural with different companies and different communities, but I think that it inspires people to know that it's okay to have a hard day, only if it becomes a problem over a long period of time where you or they can't do their job. There's a different conversation need to happen, and even that doesn't need to be punitive. It can be adaptive and supportive.
We are at time, so I will turn it back to Colin to close us out.
Well, thank you, Dr. Watts. Thank you, Carolyn. Thanks to everybody for joining. Hope you've got some takeaways from today. And please be sure to continue to check out the great curated content on the Village. There's another session tomorrow. It's part 2 of resiliency, the recipe for resiliency. So with that, have a great day, everybody.